Caleb Mercer was 37 years old the night his wife forgot to end a phone call. She had stepped out to the back porch the way she often did after dinner, said she needed air, and Caleb had stayed at the kitchen table with his hands around a glass of water and the particular quietness of a man who had learned a long time ago that silence was not emptiness. It was information. He had his phone on the table, face down, and somewhere in the ordinary mechanics of an ordinary Tuesday evening, Diane's call to him, the call she had made by accident while scrolling her contacts, stayed open. He picked it up because he thought she needed something. He heard a man laugh first. Then he heard her voice, loose and warm in the way it had not been with him for a very long time, and she said, "He believed every lie. Every single one. He thinks I'm out here getting air." Another laugh. And then, "I've been doing this for 2 years, baby. He doesn't see anything." Caleb set the phone down on the table. His face did not change. He was a data systems architect. He spent his professional life building infrastructure that processed information at scale. Systems that caught anomalies, flagged patterns, and produced conclusions from noise. He understood, in a cellular way, the difference between a single data point and a confirmed pattern. What he had just heard was not a data point. It was a confirmation. What Diane did not know, what she could not have known from the back porch with her phone pressed to her ear and her laughter loose in the night air, was that Caleb Mercer had been collecting data points for 14 months. And she had no idea that the man she described as seeing nothing had already seen everything. What happened in the weeks that followed would cost her far more than a marriage. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville, Tennessee, in a subdivision that backed up to a tree line Caleb had always liked for the way it absorbed sound. He had bought the house before the marriage, in the years when he was still contracting independently and living with the careful financial discipline of a man who had grown up watching his mother manage a household on a nurse's salary and make it look effortless. His mother, Gloria, had passed 4 years ago, and there were still mornings when he reached for his phone to call her before he remembered. She had been the kind of woman who said very little about very much and a great deal about the things that mattered. She had told him once, when he was in his 20s and making the kind of decisions that seemed large, but were actually small. "Baby, the thing about a lie is that it needs company. It always calls for another one. You just have to be patient and let them fill the room." He thought about that more now. The morning after the phone call, Caleb sat in his home office with the door closed and the blinds half drawn and worked through his contractor files with the methodical patience of a man who had always built things from the ground up. He had the kind of face that did not broadcast what was happening behind it. Colleagues called him composed. His former college roommate called him unreadable. And Diane had once told him early in their relationship that she found his steadiness magnetic. That same steadiness had apparently made it very easy for her to operate beside him undetected. He had first noticed something was different 16 months ago. A shift in the temperature of ordinary things. She began angling her phone away when she typed. She became attentive to the Wi-Fi router in a way she had never been before, resetting the password twice without mentioning it. She came home from a conference in Memphis with a tan line that did not match 3 days of conference rooms. He noted each thing without reacting to any of them, the way a systems architect notes anomalies without immediately triggering alerts, waiting for pattern confirmation before initiating a response. She had a colleague named Victor Lane. He was a regional sales director at her company, divorced, with the particular social confidence of men who mistake access for worth. He had appeared in her stories with increasing frequency over the past year and a half, always in the casual register of someone designed to read as harmless. Victor had said the funniest thing in the meeting today. Victor covered for her when the presentation ran long. Victor was just a work friend, she had said once, without Caleb having asked. His other phone, a secondary device he kept secured and registered to his LLC for client communication, was on his desk now. He picked it up and opened a folder he had created 11 months ago. He had named it System Log. It was time to open it fully. The discovery did not arrive from a single source. It arrived the way structural failures arrive, not from one crack but from the convergence of stresses that had been building in separate places at the same time. He began with the router logs. He had set up the home network himself, which meant he had access to the administrative console that Diane did not know existed behind the password she had changed. He pulled the access history going back 18 months. The pattern was precise. An unknown device had connected to the home Wi-Fi repeatedly during periods when Caleb was traveling for work. It connected from the driveway, the signal strength indicated outside the house, between the hours of 8 and 11 in the evening. 17 separate instances over 14 months. His hands did not shake. He cross-referenced the router timestamps against his own travel calendar. Every single instance landed on a night he was away from Nashville. Not most of them. Every one. He then opened the shared household bank statements, an account that ran parallel to his primary financial accounts, which Diane handled, and which he had always let her manage without interest because it was used for groceries and utilities and the minor ordinance of a shared life. He scrolled backward through 20 months of transactions. There was a pattern here too, less technical but equally clear. Recurring charges at a restaurant in East Nashville that neither of them had ever mentioned going to together. A hotel charge in March at a property in Chattanooga during a weekend. Diane had told him she was visiting her college roommate. 2 charges at a florist. Not their anniversary. Not her birthday. Not any occasion he could map to their shared calendar. He forwarded the statements to his personal encrypted drive. He documented the router logs and exported them. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the office with the tree line visible through the half-drawn blinds and let the full shape of what he was looking at settle into place. 2 years, she had said. He was looking at 20 months of documented evidence. He suspected the other 2 months existed in records he had not yet accessed. He opened a new tab and searched the public court records database he used occasionally for client due diligence. Victor Lane had a civil judgment against him from 2021. A former business partner had sued him for misappropriation of funds in a joint LLC. The judgment had been settled quietly, but the record was public, and the amount, $63,000, was specific and documented. There was also a prior divorce, finalized in 2019, in which the opposing counsel had submitted an affidavit alleging financial concealment. Caleb read through it twice. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person who would understand immediately what he needed. "Patricia," he said, when his attorney answered. "I need an appointment this week. I have a folder I need you to see, and I need to understand what our options look like before anyone else starts moving." He paused, watching a bird settle on the fence at the edge of the tree line. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have documentation." Patricia Osai had been practicing family and civil law in Nashville for 19 years. She was a small woman with a deliberate manner and the particular quality of certain experienced attorneys of making the most devastating observations in the quietest possible register. She reviewed Caleb's folder across her desk on a Thursday afternoon. The router logs and bank statements and court records spread before her in the order he had compiled them. She read without speaking for a long time. Then she looked up. "The router logs establish a pattern of access by an unregistered device on the precise nights you were traveling," she said. "That is not conclusive of an affair independently, but combined with the financial trail, the hotel charge, the restaurant pattern, the florist. It builds a coherent picture. She set her glasses down. Tennessee is not a no-fault only state. Fault can be established, and it is relevant to the distribution of marital assets, particularly where dissipation is present. I want to understand the house, Caleb said. The house was purchased by you prior to the marriage, and is documented as your separate property in the prenuptial agreement. It is not a marital asset. She paused. What she can claim is a share of assets accumulated during the marriage through joint effort. That argument becomes significantly weaker when one party has been operating in bad faith. She slid a second folder across the desk toward him. I also ran a credit search on Victor Lane. In addition to the 2021 civil judgment, he has an active heirs lien filed in January of this year. He is not a man of means. Whatever Diane believes she was building with him, she was not building financial security. Caleb looked at the folder and thought about the word building. He was a systems architect. He built infrastructure designed to be invisible until needed, designed to hold weight that nobody ever saw being added. He had spent his career making things that worked quietly and held firm when everything else failed. 2 weeks, Patricia said. We file the response in 2 weeks. I want one more thing from you before then. Any additional documentation you can gather on the dissipated funds. He nodded and stood and shook her hand. Real power, he had learned long ago, did not announce itself. It simply remained operational when everything else went offline. His cousin Darnell lived 20 minutes east of Nashville, in a house with a workshop out back where he repaired motorcycles and spoke plainly about things other people spent whole conversations avoiding. He was 44, had been divorced once himself, and had the specific wisdom that comes from having made every avoidable mistake and paid for each one personally. Caleb drove out on a Saturday morning. They sat in the workshop with the door open and the late October light coming in flat and gold across the concrete floor. Darnell listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, he turned a wrench over in his hands for a moment. She told him you believed every lie, he said. Yes, but you didn't. No. Darnell set the wrench down. You know what she made when she said that? He looked at Caleb directly. She made a record of her own intentions. Out loud, on an open line. He shook his head slowly. Some people are so confident in what they think a man can't see that they forget to look at who's looking. Caleb said nothing. You were never blind, Darnell said. You were patient. That's a different thing entirely. He picked up the wrench again. She built 2 years of lies inside your house. You spent 14 months building something she doesn't know exists. You already know which one's going to hold. He went back to the motorcycle. Caleb sat in the workshop a while longer, watching the light move across the floor, and thought about what it meant to be the man nobody was watching when everyone should have been. He came home that evening to find Diane in the kitchen, cooking the pasta dish she made when she was managing something internally, when she needed the occupation of her hands. She smiled at him in the way she had been smiling at him for 2 years now, the smile that he could see clearly as performance, and asked him how Darnell was. Fine, he said. Good to see him. She asked if he wanted garlic bread. He said yes. He sat at the kitchen table where he had sat 11 days ago with an open phone call and a woman's voice saying things she believed he would never hear. And he asked about her day, and she told him. And he listened, and he ate the pasta, and he asked if she needed anything before he went to the study to work. She said she was good. He nodded. He went to the study and opened his laptop and spent 90 minutes completing the final documentation packet for Patricia. 4 months of additional bank records, a screenshot archive from the router console, and a timeline he had built in a spreadsheet that mapped every documented instance against every alibi Diane had offered him over the same period. 22 instances, 22 explanations. Not a single overlap. He saved the file, encrypted it, and sent it to Patricia's secure portal. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of his office and listened to the ordinary sounds of the house settling around him and thought about his mother's words. The lie always calls for another one. You just have to be patient and let them fill the room. The room, he thought, was very full. Diane had suggested the restaurant herself. It was a place in the Gulch she liked, upscale enough that she associated it with occasions that mattered to her sense of herself, and she had said over breakfast one morning that they should talk, really talk, and suggested dinner that Friday. She had the look of a woman who had decided the timing was right for something. Caleb had agreed without hesitation. He arrived first. He had asked Patricia to be present, in a professional capacity, at a table nearby. He had also called Diane's sister, Renata, who had called him 2 months ago to say quietly that she was worried about Diane and that something felt wrong and that she thought Caleb deserved to know that. And Renata had come, and she sat at the bar with a glass of water and the expression of a woman who loved her sister and was prepared to be disappointed by her. Diane walked in at 7 and found Caleb at the table and registered the presence of Patricia Osai 2 tables away with a shift in her expression that was small but specific. She sat down. Caleb greeted her normally. They ordered. The first 10 minutes were surface level. The restaurant was busy. The week had been long. She mentioned a project at work. He let it move at her pace because he was a patient man, and because he understood that every system eventually reaches the moment where it can no longer sustain the load it has been carrying. She got there somewhere between the appetizer and the entree. "I think we need to talk about where we are," she said. She had rehearsed this. He could hear the prepared quality of it. "I think we've grown apart. I think we both know this hasn't been working." He nodded slowly. "I think," she continued, measuring each word now, "that the fairest thing would be to separate amicably. I think we both deserve to move forward." Caleb reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a folded document on the table between them. "I agree," he said. She looked at the document. It was Patricia's response to her attorney's filing, the comprehensive answer that had been served to Derek Combs's office that afternoon. She opened it and began to read, and her expression changed the way expressions change when the ground shifts and does not shift back. Patricia stood and moved to the table. She placed the router logs down first, then the bank records, then the hotel receipt from Chattanooga and the florist charges, and the timeline spreadsheet with its 22 documented instances. She placed Victor Lane's civil judgment and Ayers lien beside them. She placed the prenuptial agreement, notarized and intact. And then she placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. He believed every lie, every single one. The restaurant was not silent. The restaurant was fully occupied and entirely unaware of what was happening at a corner table in the back. But the space between the three of them was absolutely still. Diane looked at Caleb. He looked back at her. "You left the call open," he said. His voice was level and quiet, the voice of a man who had been building toward this moment for 14 months and had arrived at it without hurry. 11 days ago. Tuesday night. You stepped out for air. Her mouth opened. From the bar, Renata stood and walked over. She looked at her sister for a long moment, and then she looked at the documents, and then she set her hand briefly on Caleb's shoulder and left the restaurant without speaking. Diane's first word was his name. Then it was an explanation, Then it was that it was complicated. Then it was that he didn't understand. The attempts came in the order they always come, and each one found nothing to hold on to, because the documentation had already mapped every inch of the territory she was trying to claim. Patricia gathered the papers into a folder with the efficiency of a woman who had done this before. The dissipation claim totals $41,000, she said. That figure is documented and will be presented in full. The prenuptial agreement protects Mr. Mercer's separate property, including the house. The fault filing has been submitted. She looked at Diane without judgment and without warmth. Your attorney has the full packet. Caleb stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Diane one final time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the particular clarity of a man who had built a system designed to hold under pressure and was watching it perform exactly as designed. You said I believed every lie, he said. I heard you say it. I want you to know that. I heard it, and I documented it, and I let it sit in the folder with everything else because I'm an architect. I don't move on a single data point. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. I wait until the full picture is confirmed, and then I build accordingly. He walked through the restaurant and out into the Nashville evening and did not look back. Some things you only needed to say once. 8 months had passed like water by the time the Japanese magnolia he had planted along the back fence finished its first full bloom. He stood on the back deck on a Saturday morning with coffee going warm in his hand and watched the light move through the white blossoms with the patience of a man who had learned to take time on its own terms. The house was his. Patricia had made certain of that efficiently and without drama. The divorce had been finalized in the spring, the fault filing having done precisely what the law allowed it to do when one party arrived at the table with documentation and the other arrived with stories. His systems consultancy had landed a contract with a regional hospital network in April, a 3-year infrastructure engagement worth $2.1 million that he had been positioning toward for 18 months. He had hired 2 junior architects in May. The work was steady and specific, and suited him entirely. Victor Lane had settled his ears lean by liquidating assets, including a car Diane had apparently believed he owned outright, but had in fact leased through a business account that no longer existed. He had relocated to Knoxville by summer. Diane had moved to an apartment in Midtown and taken a position at a smaller firm at a significant reduction in title and compensation. Her social network had contracted in the way social networks contract when the story of what happened becomes known by the people who had always liked the other person more. Caleb had heard this through Renata, who checked in with him occasionally with the quiet loyalty of a woman who had chosen correctly about where to place her regard. There was a woman named Simone now. She was a project manager at a construction firm he consulted with. Methodical, warm, funny in a dry and considered way that reminded him of the kind of humor that reveals character rather than performs it. She had asked him good questions on their first dinner and better ones on the second. They had not rushed anything. Neither of them needed to. He heard her moving in the kitchen now, the particular sound of a person comfortable in a space they are beginning to inhabit naturally. He pressed the last of his coffee to his lips and looked at the magnolia. He had been patient. He had been precise. He had built a response to deception with the same architectural care he brought to every system he designed, load-bearing, redundant, and invisible until the moment it was needed. She had believed he saw nothing. He had seen everything, in the order it arrived, and filed it where it would matter, and waited. That was the thing about infrastructure. You never noticed it, until it held. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.